as a philosopher, you know better than anyone that even the most mind-bending theories, like, the really complex ones, they all depend on these simple building blocks, these concepts we just kind of assume.
Right, right. We take them for granted.
Exactly. So today, we're going right to the core, the bedrock. We're talking about facts.
Absolutely. A deep dive into facts. And what better guide for a deep dive than the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we're talking about the facts entry naturally.
Naturally.
So we're not just going to define fact no way. We're going to break it down, see how philosophers have been grappling with this thing like throughout history, right up to today.
But rich history, for sure.
It is. We're going to uncover the different ways they've understood facts, where they agree, where they disagree, and why this matters so much. Like, this isn't just trivia, right? This gets to the heart of language, of reality. I mean, wow.
Really foundational stuff. And the second entry doesn't mess around. We've got Hume, Wittgenstein, Anscombe, Russell, the big names.
Big names.
And a whole bunch of contemporary philosophers, too.
Perfect. So the entry points out right away, fact doesn't always mean the same thing. Like, sometimes it's just those everyday matters of fact.
Right, the stuff we learn from experience.
Exactly. The contingent truths, like Hume nailed it when he separated those from relations of ideas.
Right, he was all about that distinction facts as empirical, contingent. But then the entry takes us to functorial facts, and things get more interesting.
Functorial facts. Okay, so what are those?
Well, think about when we say it is a fact that. It is a fact that the Earth revolves around the sun, or the fact that water is HEO is fascinating.
Okay, I see. So it's using fact as part of a statement, like a building block of...
Like how we describe reality.
Yeah, and that's where things get really philosophical.
Totally. Because then you start asking, are these facts things in the world?
Like real things.
Yeah, real things. And if they are, what are they doing there? How do they fit in with everything else?
Yeah.
In the band, we're talking about semantics, ontology, the whole shebang.
Metaphysics, epistemology.
It's all connected.
So right off the bat, we've got this fork in the road.
With functorial facts, you mean?
Yeah. Like you could say, some are contingent, like I'm talking right now, that's a fact, but it could have been different.
Right, contingent.
But then there are things like math facts, like 2 + 2 = 4. That seems necessary, like it couldn't be any other way.
But some philosophers would say, hold on, even those seemingly necessary truths
Are contingent.
they'd argue it's all contingent, just different flavors of those Humenian matters of fact.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Wittgenstein, in his Tractatus, he was all about this. The world is the totality of facts, he said, and all facts are contingent.
Wow. So even the laws of logic.
Just a matter of how things happen to be. Mind-blowing, right?
It is. And the entry points out that functorial facts have some close relatives, words we kind of use in similar ways.
Yeah.
Circumstance, situation.
Right, right.
And, of course, state of affairs.
Which in German is Sachverhalt, by the way.
Sachverhalt, of course. But even though we use these words almost interchangeably,
But not always.
not always, the entry's got a good example. Like, we can say, the state of affairs that the meeting was delayed, no problem.
But try saying, it is a circumstance that the meeting was delayed.
Yeah, that sounds off.
It does, right. And same with, it is a situation that,
Just settle.
but
Yeah.
important.
Yeah.
These little linguistic quirks, they hint at deeper differences in how we're thinking about these concepts.
So we've got these two main ways of thinking about fact. Now, the Stanford entry gets into the real meat of it. 3 major views on what these functorial facts are, deep down.
Okay, lay it on me.
Okay, so the first one is kind of straightforward. It says, a fact is just a true truth bearer.
A true what?
Truth bearer. Think of a proposition, like a sentence that says something. If it's true, that's the fact.
So, snow is white.
Right.
If that's true, then that's the fact. Simple enough.
Right, but I mean, it feels kind of thin.
Thin.
Yeah, like are facts just
thin?
good words? Doesn't it feel like they're out there in the world somehow?
I see. It's collapsing reality into language.
Yeah.
So what's view number 2?
View number 2 says, a fact is an obtaining state of affairs.
Okay, so now we need to know what a state of affairs is.
Right. It's like a way the world could be. The cat could be on the mat or it could be under the table. Those are states of affairs.
But the cat is only actually in one place.
Exactly. So the state of affairs that obtains, that actually is the case.
That's the fact.
Yeah. So now the fact is tied to reality, to how things are.
More grounded, you could say.
Definitely. Okay, and view number 3.
This is the fancy one, right?
Well, it's definitely distinct. It says a fact is a sui generis entity,
Sui generis.
meaning one of a kind. It's not just a true proposition, and it's not just a state of affairs that happens to be true. It's like this basic ingredient of reality.
Okay.
So the fact that the apple is red is the apple, the object, exemplifying the property of redness.
Exemplifying. It's like the apple is showing off its redness.
Yeah, something like that. And this view, it really emphasizes the structure of reality, how it's built.
Okay, so 3 very different ways of looking at what facts are. But I'm sensing a but coming.
There's always a but in philosophy, right?
Yeah.
So to really get these views, the entry is like, hold on, we got to unpack a whole bunch of other concepts first.
Oh boy, here we go.
It's like we need to talk about truth itself. What truth bearers are things like propositions, then there's states of affairs, what obtaining even means, objects, properties, relations, and then there's this whole thing about exemplification.
Exemplification, right. It's a lot.
It is. But as a philosopher, I know you appreciate the subtle distinctions.
Of course.
So, for example, when we talk about propositions, the entry mentions they're made up of concepts, right?
Yeah.
You've got your individual concepts, like Socrates,
Uh-huh.
then general concepts, like is wise, and then there are the logical concepts, like not. These are things we can, like, grasp, understand.
Okay, I'm with you.
But properties and relations, they're different. We don't understand them in the same way. They're exemplified by objects or they connect objects.
Give me an example.
Sure, take gravity. We understand the concept of gravity, but the property itself, that's what's making things fall.
Right, it's doing the work.
Exactly. So the property being green, it's not just an idea in our heads. It's something the leaf actually embodies somehow.
Substantiates, yeah, and that's key to that facts as exemplifications view, right?
Right. And with obtaining states of affairs, the big thing is this idea of obtaining,
Obtains if.
if it's actually the case. So a state of affairs involves objects and properties or relations, and if the object really does have that property, or if those objects are related in that way,
Then it obtains.
boom, that's the fact. And the entry says obtaining is often treated like is true. Both are often seen as timeless, tenseless in philosophy.
Right, not tied to a specific moment.
Exactly. And speaking of subtle distinctions, there's a bit of a terminology heads up here. Some philosophers, they use proposition or even structured proposition when they mean what others call states of affairs.
So you gotta watch out for that.
Definitely. And then there's how we use state of affairs in everyday talk, like just whatever's happening, not this technical philosophical thing. The philosophical use, it often comes from the German Sachverhalt.
Sachverhalt. Gotta love those German terms.
As a philosopher, you know how important this is, right?
Precision of language is key. We can't be mixing up different positions just because of words.
Exactly. And the entry also mentions a little wrinkle that states of affairs sometimes are said to last, to persist, but Sachverhalt usually aren't.
Interesting. I wonder if that reflects deeper theoretical commitments.
I think it does. Okay, so we've got these different ways of understanding what facts are, and of course this leads to a whole cascade of deeper questions.
Naturally. Deeper questions are kind of our thing, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So now we're getting into ontology, what exists, and metaphysics, the nature of existence. And the entry really gets into it in the section on facts, ontology, and metaphysics.
It's getting real.
Oh, yeah. So, for example, if you go with the facts as exemplifications view or the obtaining states of affairs one,
Uh-huh.
you immediately run into this question about properties and relations themselves. Like, what are they? Are they universals?
Universals. So like abstract things that can be in multiple objects at once.
Yeah, like redness. There's just one redness, but it's in all the red things.
Okay. So are properties universals or
Or are they tropes? That's the other option.
absurd.
Like specific instances of a property tied to a specific object. So each red thing has its own unique redness.
That's a bit harder to wrap my head around.
It is, right. And then if they are universals, are they always exemplified, like Aristotle thought?
So no redness without some red thing.
Right. Or can they exist on their own, like Plato might have said?
Big implications either way.
Huge. And then are properties purely qualitative, like being square? Or can they be more substantial, like being human?
Whoa, so now we're talking about the building blocks of what things are.
Exactly. It gets deep fast.
And it doesn't stop there, right? The entry goes on and on.
Oh, yeah. Like, what about facts that seem to involve abstract objects? The fact that the number 2 is prime, for example.
Right. Does that fit into our theories?
Exactly. And then if a fact involves a concrete object, like this table is solid,
Is the fact itself concrete or abstract?
tricky. And then there's the whole issue of logically complex facts, like negative facts. It is not raining.
Yeah, that's a fact, right?
Okay, I see where this is going. And conditional facts. If it rains, then the ground will be wet. How do those work?
So many questions.
I know, and it keeps going. Like, what about the relationship between facts and events?
Right. Do events happen because they're part of bigger facts?
Maybe. And how do we tell if two facts are the same fact?
Identity conditions for facts. That's a good one.
And then there are states of affairs that don't obtain, like the cat is on the moon. Can those involve things that don't even exist?
Like the moon cat.
Exactly. And then there are the even deeper, like truly metaphysical questions. Do states of affairs exist necessarily? What about facts as exemplifications? Are they contingent or necessary?
This is the kind of stuff that gives you a philosophical headache, but in a good way.
In the best way.
Yep.
And the entry even mentions this critique of just seeing facts as containing objects and properties as parts.
Okay, so what's the problem with that?
Well, it gets into mereology, the study of parts and wholes.
Of course it does.
So the idea is if you've got a fact made of a substance and a property.
Like the apple and its redness.
Yeah. If those don't belong to the same fundamental category of being.
Then maybe the fact can't be built that way.
Right. Like maybe mereology has rules against that.
Fascinating. It challenges the intuitive picture.
It does. And it leads to some more radical views, like what if objects are facts?
Whoa. Instead of just being in facts.
Yeah. And then there's this whole idea of aboutness.
What a fact is about.
Yeah. Like,
Yeah.
is it about a specific thing or is it more general? That helps distinguish between singular facts and general facts.
Okay, and how does aboutness come into play?
Well, for one, it's related to how we think about intrinsicality.
Intrinsicality. So like what a thing is in itself, regardless of anything else.
Exactly. And then there's the whole role of facts in modality, necessity and possibility.
Ah, yes. Modal logic.
So are modal properties like possibly true part of the state of affairs itself?
Like built in.
Right. Or are they about the state of affairs as a whole, like de dicto modality?
Okay, I'm following.
And then if we think of facts as objects exemplifying properties.
How does that work for facts like Socrates is necessarily human?
Does that mean in every possible world Socrates has to be human?
Whoa. So now we're talking about possible worlds.
It gets complicated.
It always does.
The entry also points out that facts are often seen as explanations for other things.
Like, the fact that the stove was on explains the fact that the water boiled.
Exactly. But some philosophers are like, wait a minute.
Does saying the fact that really add anything.
Isn't it enough to just say the water boiled because the stove was on?
Yeah, is the fact that just extra words.
That's the debate. And then there's the whole role of facts and the semantics of counterfactuals, what if statements.
Ah, yes. Counterfactuals, always a fun topic.
The entry mentions Kretzer's work on this.
Right. Premise semantics.
So the idea is how true a counterfactual is depends on how similar the possible world where the antecedent is true is to our actual world.
No way.
And facts about our world determine that similarity.
So facts are involved in how we think about possibilities.
Exactly. And finally, the entry talks about how realism versus anti-realism debates.
Are often about what kinds of facts there are.
Right, like the debate about tense, for example.
Tense, a classic.
So are there facts about the past, present, and future? Like, is there a fact that it is now raining?
That's the A theory of time, right?
Yeah.
Tense facts are real.
Exactly. But the B theorists...
They'd say, hold on, all facts are ultimately tenseless. It's just events happening in a certain order.
Right. And the entry points out how hard it is to even define what a tensed fact would be.
It's a slippery concept.
It is. Okay, so we've seen how central facts are to all these big questions in ontology and metaphysics. Now, the entry shifts gears to knowledge.
Knowledge and facts, how do they relate?
Well, it starts with the fact of nature of to know.
Fact of me.
If you know that P...
Then P has got to be true.
Exactly. And knowing something, knowing why, well, that means why has to exist.
Right, you can't know a unicorn if there are no unicorns.
Precisely. So then the big question for philosophers is knowing that P, is that actually knowing a fact?
As in, are we directly in contact with a fact when we know something?
Yeah. And not just a true proposition or whatever, but a real, robust fact.
I see. So is knowledge a kind of relationship with a fact?
That's the idea. And some big names have argued for this. Husserl, Russell.
Russell, really?
Oh, yeah. He even said that what we perceive, the object of perception,
Is a fact.
a complex fact, he called it. So when you see a red apple, what you're really seeing...
Is a fact. Bold claim.
It is. But the entry points out there are plenty of philosophers who disagree.
Of course there are. What are their arguments?
Well, take a simple case like the cat is sleeping.
Okay.
If you know that, it seems like you're in some kind of contact with the cat, with its state of sleeping.
Right. Not with some abstract proposition.
Exactly. So maybe in those basic perceptual cases.
Knowing something is knowing a fact.
Possibly. But what about more complex knowledge?
Like, what if you know a complicated logical truth? Or something you learned from a book?
Exactly. Is that knowing a fact?
It seems like we're stretching the idea pretty thin.
That's the argument. And then the entry brings up Kratzer's account of knowledge, specifically in relation to Gettier problems.
Gettier problems, the bane of epistemologists everywhere.
So Kratzer says facts are like particulars that exemplify propositions.
Like objects exemplifying properties.
Right. And to know something, you have to believe it de re.
Do re, meaning...
Your belief is about the fact itself. Not just that the proposition is true, but about the specific fact that makes it true.
Okay. And how does that solve Gettier problems?
Well, take that example with Smith and Jones.
The one where Jones owns a Ford or Brown's in Barcelona.
That's the one. Smith believes Jones owns a Ford or Brown's in Barcelona. And it happens to be true because Brown's in Barcelona.
But Smith doesn't know that.
Exactly. And Kratzer would say it's because Smith's belief isn't about the fact that Brown's in Barcelona. It's about the fact that Jones owns a Ford, which is false.
I see. So even though the belief is true, it's not about the right fact. Clever.
It is, right. Okay, so moving on, the entry then gets into the roles of facts in intentionality, semantics, and truth-making.
Big topics. How do facts fit into all that?
Well, with intentionality, it's about how our thoughts can be about things.
Right. The aboutness of our mental states.
Exactly. And one way to explain that is to say our beliefs and judgments, they're about states of affairs in the world.
So when I think it's raining, my thought is directed at the state of affairs of it raining.
Right. And if that state of affairs obtains, if it's actually raining...
Then my thought is correct.
Exactly. And a bunch of philosophers have argued for this, from Meinong and Husserl to Russell and Searle.
So thoughts are about states of affairs. What about in semantics?
Similar idea. Propositions, they represent possible states of affairs.
And if the state of affairs actually is the case?
The proposition is true.
Makes sense. But the entry raises an interesting objection.
Which is?
Well, do we really need to think about states of affairs every time we think?
Like if I just think, it's raining.
Do I need to have this whole concept of states of affairs in my head?
That's the question.
Maybe there's a simpler way to think about it.
Maybe. So instead of saying thoughts are about states of affairs...
We could just say they have correctness conditions that mention states of affairs.
Right. So my thought is correct if the state of affairs obtains, regardless of whether I'm thinking about it explicitly.
And then we can still say facts make judgments correct.
Exactly. And in semantics, facts make propositions true.
So a proposition is true because the corresponding fact is out there making it true.
Right. But then, of course, there's the philosophical pushback.
Which is...
Do we really need facts to explain truth or correctness?
Like, can't we just say P is true if and only if P?
Right. Maybe we don't need this whole extra category of facts.
Unless there's a really good reason.
Exactly. And that brings us to truth-maker theory.
Truth-maker theory. Okay, what's that all about?
Well, it's right at the intersection of ontology, metaphysics, and semantics.
Sound like a party.
And the most basic truth-maker theory is that facts are what make propositions true.
Okay, so back to facts as truth makers.
Right. And this leads to the idea of truth-maker maximalism.
Maximalism.
The idea that every truth has a truth-maker.
So no truth without a corresponding fact making it true.
Exactly. And then there's factualist truth-maker maximalism.
Which is?
Every truth is made true by a fact specifically.
Okay, I see. So now we're getting into the details.
We are. And of course, this raises the classic worry about ontological bloat.
Bloat.
Yeah, like are we overpopulating reality with facts?
Like for every little truth, there's a whole fact out there.
Right. Especially for negative truths, like there are no unicorns.
Or conditional truths, like if I drop this, it will fall. Do we need a fact for each of those?
It does seem excessive.
It does. So how do factualists respond to that?
Well, one common move is to say, okay, only the most basic truths have fact truth makers.
The atomic truths, like the simplest building blocks.
Exactly. And more complex truths are true because of those basic facts and how they're logically related.
So we're being more economical with our facts.
Right. And the entry mentions this really interesting argument called the slingshot argument.
Slingshot.
Yeah, it's a bit weird. But basically it suggests that if there's even one fact,
there might only be one giant, all-encompassing fact.
Whoa, that's not very helpful for truth maker theory.
Not if we want each truth to have its own truth maker.
Exactly. And then the entry challenges this assumption that truth makers have to be fundamental,
Fundamental meaning,
like the ultimate building blocks of reality.
I see. So maybe facts exist, but they're not the most basic things.
Right. Maybe they're made up of other things that are even more basic.
Or maybe facts are complex and their parts are more fundamental.
Exactly. So lots of possibilities. And then there's this linguistic puzzle about how to understand expressions like the fact that Sam is sad.
Right, those fact that phrases.
They kind of look like definite descriptions, like the tallest man in the room.
But are they referring to a specific entity, a fact?
That's the question. The entry mentions Russell had this idea about using ontological relations to analyze them.
Like, is a term in?
Hmm?
Or is an attribute in?
Yeah, those kinds of things. So maybe when we talk about objects exemplifying properties, it's really about those relations.
Interesting. So maybe we don't need to think of facts as these separate things.
Maybe not. And then there's the question of whether those facts, that phrases, are rigid designators,
There's designators.
meaning they refer to the same thing in every possible world.
So we're back to modality.
Always back to modality in philosophy.
It's everywhere.
Okay, so the last big topic the entry tackles is brute facts.
Brute facts. Now we're getting to the really mysterious stuff.
Oh, yeah. A brute fact is basically a fact that has no explanation.
It just is.
It just is. No further reason, no ground. And the entry is careful to distinguish between personal explanations and impersonal explanations.
Right. Someone explaining something to someone else versus one fact explaining another.
Exactly. And we're focused on impersonal explanations here.
And on metaphysical bruteness.
Right. But we also have to distinguish between epistemic and metaphysical explanations.
Epistemic is about what we know, right?
Yeah, our reasons for believing something.
Yeah.
And metaphysical.
It's about what's actually the case, regardless of what we know.
Exactly. And the entry gives this great example from Bolzano about a thermometer.
The thermometer.
Yeah, so one explanation is that warmer weather makes the thermometer reading go up.
That's a causal explanation.
Exactly. It's metaphysical. It's about how the world works. But then you could also say a high thermometer reading is evidence for warmer weather.
That's epistemic.
Yeah.
It's about what we can infer.
Right. And this leads to the distinction between epistemically brute facts
Which we don't have a good explanation for.
and metaphysically brute facts, which have no explanation whatsoever.
Okay, so two kinds of bruteness.
At least. Because the entry also points out that there are different kinds of explanations.
Like deductive nomological explanations or grounding explanations.
Right. So then you can have different kinds of bruteness, like deductive nomologically brute or ground theoretically brute.
So many ways to be brute.
I know, right? And then it gets even more nuanced.
Oh no, tell me it doesn't.
It does, because there's a difference between the explanation itself.
And the relationship that's behind it.
Right, like causal explanations are based on causation. Grounding explanations are based on grounding.
So a fact could be brute qua uncaused.
Exactly. Or brute qua ungrounded.
This is a lot to keep track of.
It is, but it shows just how complex the idea of bruteness is.
So what are some examples of metaphysically brute facts?
Well, the classic ones are things like the existence of the universe.
Okay, why is there something rather than nothing?
Right, no explanation for that. And then there are the values of fundamental physical constants.
Like the speed of light.
Yeah, or the mass of an electron. Why are those the values they are?
Nobody knows.
Maybe there's no reason. And then there are the basic laws of physics themselves.
Why do things work the way they do?
Maybe there's just no deeper explanation. And the entry connects this to some contemporary debates in metaphysics.
Like what?
Well, there's Marcosian's argument about compositional facts being brute,
Compositional facts.
like when a bunch of things make up a whole.
Right, right.
He uses that to try to answer Van Inwagen's special composition question.
Which is all about when things compose a whole.
Right, exactly. And then there's the debate between Dasgupta and Glaser about essentialist facts.
Essentialist facts.
Facts about what's essential to a thing, what makes it what it is.
Right, so like it's essential to water to be H2O.
Exactly. And they disagree about whether those are brute.
Okay, so lots of different applications of this idea of bruteness.
Oh, yeah. And the entry also mentions emergent facts.
Emergent facts.
So these might be brute in the sense of not being grounded in more basic facts.
But they're still determined by the laws of nature.
Exactly. It's like a higher level of organization that emerges from the lower level, but it's not fully reducible to it.
Okay, that's pretty mind-bending.
It is. And then there's the big debate about modal facts.
Modal facts.
Facts about necessity and possibility. Are those brute?
That's a tough one.
It is. And it ties into this question of where modal truths come from.
Like, why is something necessarily true?
Right. Some philosophers say it's because of other facts, like facts about essences.
But what does because of mean in that context?
Right. Is it explained by, grounded in, constituted by?
So many different interpretations.
And then the entry mentions Gooch, who applied ANS.